Good day, this is Dr. Rod McFarland for ISOL-531 Access Control with the University of the Cumberlands. Our lesson today is Lesson 4, Human Nature and Organizational Behavior, Access Control for Information Systems. Again, access control involves people, process, and technology. And here's the top of the slide deck. Let's get chatting about this. Dealing with human nature. Again, a predominant area of concern for cybersecurity is the human factor. And the unintentional threat, accidental things happen. Generally, people aren't following policy or some sort of established process, or that policy and process it hasn't been written yet. So they're doing things as they see fit. Hackers and motivation, we'll talk about that as well. What motivates a hacker? It's not always financial. And of course, we've mentioned this over on several times, social engineering. Well, let's get started. One of the key factors, and it's best practice, but it's also contractually required if you're doing work for other organizations. In other words, if you're a subcontracting company and you're doing work for, let's say, Boeing, or if you're working for the Department of Defense, doing some manufacturing for them, it's required that pre-employment checks happen. What information can be considered is usually specified in the contract. For example, certain entities like ITAR require that employees be U.S. citizens, whereas other entities don't have that stringent of a requirement. They're looking more for a criminal background check and a credit check as well. What information cannot be considered? The applicant has certain rights and the consequences of a bad hiring decision. So we've heard a lot of stories about bad hiring. A lot of internal hacks can happen, for example. So ongoing observation of personnel. This speaks to some sort of continuous monitoring, and oftentimes in defense contractors, they'll pull a credit report and do a criminal background check annually, but that's based on the contract and the information that the Department of Defense requires for a lot of contracts. Identification of potentially disgruntled employees. If you have somebody that's unhappy, they may go over from your company to another company, and they'll either may be tempted to destroy information or steal confidential intellectual property and take that with them. I ran into a scenario where one of my clients just recently, an engineer quit. They were disgruntled and they copied a ton of files from the server to a USB drive. Well, there's a couple of things there. They should have had the USB drive locked down, but they did have notifications set on the server for mass copying. So right away, the IT person went over to that person's cubicle, say, "What are you doing? Give me the device." But there's other ways to handle that. That person was leaving as a disgruntled employee and basically taking plans with them. Proper ways to revoke access upon employee termination. Generally speaking, when the employee comes into HR, gives their notice, at that very second, their access should be revoked. As wonderful of an employee as they are and have been maybe for years, it's always best practice just to make sure that nothing happens with their account. That way they're not responsible for anything after things are shut down. So organizational structure and access control strategy is a key part of the policies and processes, procedures that we write up. Access control model is based on an organizational structure. It's designed to prevent social engineering attacks. So second bullet down, employees are given access based on tasks they must complete as part of their job, and we talked about that earlier in the sense of Microsoft Active Directory as one example of how to do that. Access rules are based on the balance of confidentiality and the necessity. In other words, you have to give them least privilege, but that impinges upon the confidentiality of information, but yet they may need some of that information to get their work done. Organizational structure model is similar to the role-based RBAC model, so we're looking at that paired up with RBAC. Now, job rotation, if you've ever worked at a financial institution, this has been the rule of thumb forever, but job rotation is being implemented throughout other organizations. Job rotation minimizes effects of dishonesty. So let's say I know of one company that rotates programmers every 6 months from one area to another area. So that way their code, the source code is always being looked at by different sets of eyes. So that minimizes it. Plus it also ends up being a good way to do cross-training, quite honestly. So you get, if you're rotating your programmers every 6 months or a year to different departments, let's say if you have a large organization, those employees, those programmers get pretty well trained over the course of several years. Second bullet down, often used for sensitive positions, especially for those that are directly responsible for crucial or critical information systems and critical information assets. Requirement for periodic vacation. You see that when somebody takes a vacation, even if it's a week long, somebody else usually steps in. And if there's been some sort of bad behavior, that will typically show up in that 1 week where that person is on vacation. So it's a red flag when somebody never takes vacation, especially in a critical area. Periodic vacations act as a security measure. They require persons to take time off from work and provides time for evidence of dishonesty. A lot of times it's not a true investigation. It's almost similar to job rotation where you have somebody else doing the job, and the odd nature of doing work may surface. So bottom line, can also reduce the success of social engineers as well, because again, what is social engineering? It's a way of people to misrepresent themselves and get people to do things that they typically would not do. Separation of duties. I mentioned accounts receivable, accounts payable. You don't want somebody receiving the submission of bills, the same person that's writing checks, because for all purposes, they could be submitting their own bills and writing their own checks out of the same process, if you will. So separation of duty ensures that a single person does not handle all crucial decisions, and the goal is to avoid the temptation to commit fraud or other illegal activities. Again, two-person control. It avoids collusion, and there's generally monitoring and oversight with those type of duties. Responsibilities of access owners, disclosing to the users any relevant legal, regulatory, or ethical issues surrounding the use or disclosure of information. Secondly, implementing a data classification system and rating the data according to its sensitivity, confidentiality, inherent value, or other factors. And during the whole assessment process that we talked about in last week's lesson, you should prioritize the importance of your data stores, information that you keep, and also give it some sort of rating value should that data be stolen or obfuscated, breached in some manner, there's a certain value associated with it that has financial implications for the organization as well, and that needs to be addressed in the assessment of risks. Responsibility of access owners continued, maintaining a list of authorized users, and that list of authorized users can easily be generated if you're using a tool such as Microsoft Active Directory. Secondly, implementing procedures, again, policies, procedures to safeguard information from unauthorized use, disclosure, alteration, or accidental or intentional destruction. Procedures provide the employees with basically the rules of the game, how they handle themselves in the work environment. When policies and procedures are not in place, employees sort of make things up as they go along, and that could be represent a security issue in the way that they handle and manage certain things unknowingly. Third bullet down, developing a policy governing data retention and disposition. Data disposition on hard drives, as I had mentioned earlier in a lecture 1 or 2. You could follow the FIP standard, which is a government processing standard, information processing standard for disposal of hard drives. And that requires the removal of hard drives from devices such as printers, copiers, print servers, and even servers and end devices when those are being shelved out, if you will, or distributed for disposition. You want to take those drives and perhaps shred them to a certain specification. No longer is it simply secure enough just to drill a hole in the drive. So there's governing data retention and disposition. Data retention, oftentimes you may hear that governments want data to be stored 10 years. Some, depending on your organization, it may be as small as 1 year, what type of data. So that needs to be taken into consideration. Last bullet, providing users with adequate training. And again, users are the biggest problem. They're our biggest asset too, but they're our biggest problem in this, with cybersecurity. So ongoing training is a must. For example, in the Department of Defense contracts, a minimum of 1 year training, training each year for all employees is required, and it's smarter to do more frequent training. If you're in an environment, a manufacturing environment that requires safety training, just have them stick on cybersecurity training with that periodic required safety training, because having employees up to speed on cybersecurity threats is really important, since an estimate has recently been put through that about 70% of the breaches are due to poor training in a typical organization. Training employees ongoing, include multiple formats, be interactive, include multiple points of contact. Those are self-explanatory. Security awareness training facts. IT security systems conduct well-known accounting firms found by the following. By the way, there's a company called KnowBe4. Kevin Mitnick, a once hacker, now owner of or consultant to KnowBe4, does security training for organizations. That's one of the key brands in that training space. Many organizations have some sort of awareness training, and actually when you bring a person on board, one of the first trainings they need to go in, besides the new employee orientation, is cybersecurity training, and also periodically train people at least once a year. Most awareness programs are omitted have omitted important elements. That's why using products like Know Before, and no, I'm not selling it, but products like that are good because they keep up to date on the technology and the tools that attackers use, and they do a good job in informing employees constantly of some of the key cybersecurity issues. Less than 25% of organizations had no way to track awareness program effectiveness. So that's one of the requirements that you may run into, that some sort of tracking is necessary for training. In other words, when I say requirements, if you're doing business with the government or some sort of state agency or even a large manufacturer, they may have a requirement that you, as a smaller organization, provide training, and they want evidence of that. Ethics. What is right and what is wrong? I think it's kind of interesting that nowadays we teach ethics in the business environment. Enforcing policies and human resources involvement. So, best practices for managing human nature. Now, these are best practices, and I'm sure each one of you, especially if you're in the management role, will add to this list. Defining appropriate policies and procedures. Those are the guidelines that govern employee behavior. Remember, if you don't have policies, procedures, your employees are doing their best effort, whether it's right or wrong, on getting the job done. So policies and procedures are basically the rule book. Secondly, educating employees about the policies and procedures. Sure, you can have them, but you need to teach them about it. Third is discovering and addressing behavioral shortcomings. And that gets into whole deep waters there. Fourth, encouraging create risk-taking. So what this is referring to is you want employees to take a certain level of risk-taking that can benefit the job, but they have to be aware of the parameters of that risk-taking, especially in terms of security. User domain access control management. Domain access control. Here we're going into physical security versus logical security. We've already mentioned this in this course on several times. Physical security, restricting the area access, locking doors, having security guards, electronic access badges, key codes, and those sort of things to secure your environment. It could even be a whole set of cameras and that sort of thing. Logical security is like database security, access authorization, the need to know, groups and group policies, groups of file systems, supervision of review, that whole logical aspect. So physical security, logical security takes on people, process, and technology. You can put that, mark that over to the side, and each physical security and logical security have aspects of people, process, and technology. 3 states of data: data at rest, data in motion, data in process. Data at rest, stored on devices. It could be archived records, and it could be firewall logs. Firewall logs written out there, and they certainly need to be secured. Data in motion, that's sending email, anything that goes over the network, retrieving a web page, anything that's being called through the network is being pulled from a data store, data at rest, into the processor is data in motion. Will that be encrypted? Does it need to be encrypted? How are you going to secure that? Data in process. Now it says creating a new document, processing a payment. It's more appropriate to say processing a payment. You look at the in terms of what the processor is doing. There's a lot of hacks that go over capture data that's being actively processed in RAM. So that's a whole area of investigation as well. So data at rest, storage of data, data in motion where it's being moved around, whether it's in the network or within the system, and data in process, basically speaking to the RAM aspects that can be hacked into. Let's see. User domain access control. We flip back one. There we go. Protecting data at rest. Encryption, I mentioned that. Elements in databases. Keep in mind that a database system like Oracle, you have the database software like the Oracle platform, or let's say Microsoft Access, and then you have the data files, the databases that are tied or associated with that database product. Those are the elements that the software doesn't necessarily need to be encrypted. It's the data stores, the databases that need to be encrypted or secured in some manner. Files on the network and shared drives. Again, when you're getting into shared cloud environments, that's getting into a whole new bailiwick of additional security that may need to be looked at and examined. Files on portable or movable drives, such as USB and flash drives, and quite frankly, some environments do not allow those. And if you are working in a federal environment that does allow that, you will need to use FIPS certified drives. That's Federal Information Processing Standard drives, which is essentially some sort of encryption that we're not going to get into here. In general terms, yes, but not specific. Personal computer, laptops, hard drives, and you can do full disk encryption, whether it's a PC or a Mac. That will protect your data at rest. Data in motion. Now, data in motion, it could be over the network. They're showing the network in this slide. Or it could be data in motion within the server when it's pulling data from a hard drive or a network attached storage. I guess that would be over the network. But a hard drive into the processor, that's data in motion. That can be captured. That data can be captured, obfuscated, or stolen. So we need to have certain protections with that. On the network, we'll use encryption. We'll use VPN, virtual private networks. We'll use network segmentation. We'll use firewalls and application servers and firewalls as well. And that'll help protect data in motion. Data in process. Here's a picture of a RAM slot. Basically, there's a lot of different attack methods to capture data in process on a RAM. There's a lot of tools that you can download for free that'll take continuous snapshots. And once an attacker has those tools, they can figure out how to smash the stack, which is the stack is a part of the processing area within the RAM in order to steal data. So object level security. An object, again, is an item or distinct group of information. Group information as an object sets controls at the object level, and it allows us to manage groups of related data. Now, that helps with data in rest and data in motion. Okay? Object level security, because data at rest and data in motion, data at rest, whether it's a hard drive or a thumb drive, that can be considered an object. Data in motion, a network packet could be seen as an object. Are you going to protect those objects by encryption, for example? Access control list, again, ACLs. Access control list, a security identifier, identifies what access control applies to the specific user group or system. An access mask that lists the specific rights granted or denied, and it flags to indicate the type of ACE and whether child objects can inherit the rights from the main ACE that is attached. So there's a whole discussion on ACLs and ACEs that's really rich discussion in the textbook that should be reviewed. Control list types: access denied, access allowed, and a system audit. Access denied, you can say blacklist versus whitelist, and system audit. DACLs, SACLs, discretionary access control list controls access to an object, where system access control list, SACLs, handles information assurance aspect of access controls, and it could be things like log files and that sort of thing. Best practices for access control include the creation of a baseline for access. Segregate users by rights and roles. Here we're doing separation here by ACLs. Automation of user creation. That way you have that process automated. You tie or associate access controls to the environment and have a clear standard for decommissioning data storage devices. And as I mentioned earlier, that decommissioning may follow the FIP standard where you shred your drives. So there's a lot to go through in chapters 7 and 8. Very good reading on a lot of the technical aspects. Again, we're talking people, process, and technology. So for the homework this week, please read thoroughly chapters 7 and 8. Complete labs 7 and 8 and the associated quizzes. There's a midterm exam coming up, 50 questions, multiple choice. And everything's due Sunday by 11:59 p.m. Eastern Time. So thank you. This is Dr. Ron McFarland with ISOL-531 Access Control. And thank you very much. I'll look for you online.